over the past few years, as you may have guessed from earlier conversations, I've become friends with our local rabbi, Rabbi Soltar, and that's led my life to continuously sound like the start to a bad joke, like a priest and a rabbi. So we met, and then we discovered quickly that we share common passions. We share a passion for the Hebrew Scriptures, and we share a passion for Indian food. So occasionally, the good rabbi and I will get over some messy vindaloo and tikka masala, and we'll talk Scriptures. And last time we had one of these lunches, we're sitting there, and the rabbi looked at me, and he said, Paul, let me explain to you what I think is the fundamental difference between the way we approach faith. He said, and this is almost a direct quote here, he says, Judaism doesn't require belief. You don't have to believe any set of doctrines to be fully welcomed into our community. Atheists and agnostics are full members. That what defines their community is not what they believe, it's what they do. That the activities of the congregation form the community. So in his, at least in his group, his version of modern Judaism, what makes a Jew is celebrating the Passover. What makes a Jew is bar mitzvahs and eating kosher pastrami on rye and not mixing your meats and cheeses and wearing a yarmulke and learning Hebrew and practicing the Shavuot and Passover and all the great festivals. What makes a Jew is lighting the candles in preparation for Sabbath and then practicing the Sabbath. That being Jewish is embracing a Jewish way of life. It is a Jewish culture. So you can believe whatever you want, but if you want to be a Jew, you have to embrace a Jewish way of life. And now I had heard such things before, but I was like, I'm still struggling to wrap my mind around it. Like I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, but wasn't Abraham the father of faith? And he was the father of faith because he believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. And then what did he do? He sacrificed his only son, Isaac. So how do you separate that faith and action, like what you believe and what you do? Like I was struggling with this, and so I leaned in and I'm like, so you're saying that you can be fully Jewish, like you could even be a rabbi and not believe even that God exists? And he's like, exactly. And so I'm probing a little, but I'm like, but don't we agree? Don't we agree here that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength? Deuteronomy 6:5, the Torah, the greatest law in the Torah is that. Doesn't this at least imply that there's some type of alignment between what I believe or what's happening in my heart and what I do, how I act? To which he said very flatly, you can't command love. And it's true. Have you ever thought about that? You can't command love. Like love is something you can cultivate, you can foster, you can encourage, you can elicit. But it's not exactly something you can command. You can't force someone to love. You can't force yourself to love. And yet, there's that nagging problem that this is exactly what God does. He commands us to love him. So Judaism, at least in the modern expression, it de-emphasizes this. It de-emphasizes belief and love and what we would call inner transformation of life. Modern Judaism emphasizes cultural transformation, that they seek transformation for people and creating a people and for the world through a cultural presence. And the rabbi is right. This is fundamentally different than Christianity. By every single measure, if you look at what Jesus says, he inverts this exact thing, right? So for Jesus, when someone asks him, like, what's the most important commandment? He says, love God, and then love other people. Like, do that, and everything else will take care of itself. Don't worry about the externals till you've taken care of the internal. And then when someone comes up to Jesus and says, what must I do to do the works that God requires? He says, John chapter 6, the work of God is this. You ready? To believe. believe in me. Believe in me. Have faith. Believe in me. Trust me. Love God. Believe in me. Love God. Believe in me. Like Christianity at its heart, at its core, is fundamentally about an inner transformation of the soul, of the human, of the person. And from that, it then works its way out. Love God, believing Jesus, that sums up all of Christianity. And that is fundamentally different than modern Judaism. It is not about holidays. It's not about what you wear. It's not about what you eat or how you dress. It's about a relationship with God by faith in Jesus. And as Christians, historically, we have then de-emphasized cultural transformation and emphasized greatly this inner work, that becoming a Christian may or may not affect how you dress or how you eat or how you shop or what you do on vacation. And I would say that as I look through evangelicalism, at least, we've tended to focus almost exclusively on the inner transformation that God does in our hearts. And so I had this meal, and then if you've ever eaten Indian food, you know what happens next. It's just you ruminate for a while. But it wasn't just the vindaloo that was upsetting my stomach. I was thinking, on the one hand, we're right. We're right. I mean, my rabbi friend, I love him, but he got it wrong on this one, right? Like, it's like Jesus talks about, it's like to just do the outward works. It's like what he calls whitewashed sepulchers. Like, you put a dead body inside. It looks all clean and pristine on the outside, but it might be dead inside. Like, we're right. Like, if we follow Jesus, it's got to start with the heart. It's got to start on the inside. To quote Ezekiel 36, we don't just need outward works. We need God to reach in, rip out our heart of stone, and put in a heart of flesh. We need new hearts. We need new hearts. Change from the inside out. So I thought, yes, we're right. And then the next thought I had though is, but maybe we're wrong too. Like maybe we've so emphasized loving God and believing in Jesus that we've missed the call to cultural transformation. Maybe we've missed the fact that being a Christian should form our way of life. Now listen. I am not saying that we need to form culture the way Jews form culture. I'm not saying that we need to have a distinctively like a Christian subculture. Like what would that even look like? We've tried it before, right? It's like listen to your Christian music and wear your Christian t-shirt and eat Christian food, like Chick-fil-A. Like, hey, we're upfront about this stuff. That's not what we're pushing. That's not it. But I guess what I'm saying is this. Like, wouldn't it be weird if someone said, I love God with everything I have, everything I am, my heart, my soul, my strength, and then their life didn't look changed at all? Like, it didn't change how they worked, or how they vacationed, or how they spent their money, or how they dressed? Like, wouldn't that be weird? Wouldn't it be weird if someone said, I believe in Jesus. I believe in him. I believe he's the Lord of all heaven and earth. I believe that he's called me to a purpose. I believe that he's calling me to eternity with him. I believe that he's king. And then their life looked no different than anyone else's. It didn't affect how they watch TV or eat or drank or spend their money or the house they buy or the car they buy. Like, wouldn't that be strange? So this conversation left me wondering, like, okay, we're not that. We're not trying to do what Jews are doing. We're not all about cultural transformation without the heart. But if we're truly changed on the inside, shouldn't it change the way we live on the outside? Like, shouldn't it form us in the way we live as a people, the way we speak, the way we think? So today we are starting a series on culture, specifically faith and culture. And we're going to be taking the next few months and we're going to be digging into this and saying, like, what does it look like? Like, if I truly love God and I truly believe in Jesus, but I'm an American in 2018, like, what does it look like? And we're going to go back to the book of 1 Corinthians. We're going to use the Church of Corinth as a case study. And we're going to be pulling out these issues that the Corinthians dealt with and see how the Apostle Paul guided them on issues. To see if any of this sounds, these are ancient cultural issues, so they probably don't apply to us, but he's going to address things like consumerism, money, sports, economic inequality, and gender. So he's going to be going through these issues. But before we dive into the specifics of Corinth, I wanted to take a few weeks, because this is such a big topic, to kind of wrap our brains around this, because this is not a conversation we're used to having. We're used to talking about loving God and believing in Jesus. But this is actually going to talk about, like, how do we live? Like, how do we dress? How do we speak? How do we think about gender and money and the poor among us and the rich? And how do we do life as Christians in our world today? Specifically, the question I want to set the stage with today, and then Andy Crouch is going to build on this next week, and then the week after that, and then finally we'll get to Corinthians. It's the question I want to ask today is this: how should faith in Jesus form our way of life? How should it form us so that we create a distinctively Christian version of American culture in 2018? Conversely, how does the way we dress and eat and work and shop and vacation, how does that affect our faith in God? Make sense? It's both. Like, how does our love for God shape how we live, and how does how we live shape our love for God? That's the question. And if we want to understand this conversation, if we want to dig into what it really means to be a Christian, the place we're going to start is not 1 Corinthians, but it is the book of Exodus. Exodus, and I'm totally serious. So you do realize that Jesus was a rabbi, right? The Apostle Paul, he was an expert in Jewish law. So the place we need to start is actually in these first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's called Torah. It's God's law here. And this, in the book of Exodus, is going to be where we get wholesale, our language of salvation. You know this, right? Like, if you, I've been scolded before for spending too much time preaching from the Old Testament, and I'm always like, these churches where they never preach the Old Testament, I'm like, these poor Christians, they have no idea what they believe. You know, it's from the book of Exodus that we get the language of what it means to be saved, set free, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, children of God. It's where we get the rituals of communion. It's where we get the language for church, right? Like, if apart from that story, the teachings of Paul and the teachings of Jesus, they're disconnected. They make no sense. So if we want to understand what it means to be a Christian, Exodus is the place we need to start, or actually it begins with the end of the book of Genesis. So let's paint the picture, and then we'll dive into some details and unpack a few things here. Starting out in the end of Genesis, if you were here a year and a half ago or something like that, you remember the story of Joseph, right? Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That Joseph. So he goes down into Egypt, and by chapter 41, 42 of the book of Genesis, he's now in this great position. He's an important official in Egypt, and he fits right in. We learned that he dresses like an Egyptian, shaves like an Egyptian, wears Egyptian jewelry, speaks Egyptian, eats Egyptian food, drives an Egyptian chariot, marries an Egyptian woman, works for the Egyptian government. In fact, he fits in so well to Egyptian culture that when his Jewish brothers come down to visit him, like, they come down and they don't recognize him. They don't realize it's Joseph because he looks like an Egyptian. If you follow the story, by the end of Genesis, this great patriarch Jacob and his 12 sons, who become the 12 tribes of Israel, the very people of God, they come down to live in Egypt with Joseph, and presumably it goes really well for a few generations, for a couple hundred years, who knows how long. But then we flip one page and we read in Exodus chapter 1, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and we're like, uh-oh, what's that mean? And very, very quickly, like, life in Egypt that was so good, they loved Egypt, they loved Egyptian culture, they enjoyed all the benefits of that, suddenly gets turned upside down. They become the object of oppression, racism, hatred. So, like, the Egyptians, when they speak to the Israelites, you hear them call them what? Hebrew. Hebrew. On the lips of an Egyptian, when you call them a Hebrew, it's like us using the N-word. It's a racial slur. So like, you have this racism. They're treated terribly. They're forced into labor. They literally become slaves. the Egyptians refuse to eat with the Israelites. They make fun of how they look and how they dress and their beards and how they speak. And so the people of God become so overwhelmed with Egyptian culture that they can't get out from underneath it. We learned that along the way, externally, they have all this external oppression, right? They become slaves, oppressed victims. The Egyptians literally kill their babies. But internally, too, we find that the people of God are so oppressed by the Egyptians that they start to view themselves as, I'm a slave. I'm powerless. I'm hopeless. I'm a nobody. In fact, we find that even when they finally get out of Egypt, when God says, no, I'm saving you, you are my special people, even after all that happens, what happens when you pull them out of Egypt? Their desires are changed. They now long for that Egyptian food. I want some leeks, right? When they get their opportunity to worship the one true God, what do? When they're finally free, what do? They fashion a golden calf. Because that's what they've been so pressurized and crushed by Egyptian culture that's how they think. So these Egyptians are, here's an actual scene from the time. They think this might even be Hebrew people. So they're enslaved in this country. And then during this time, God, though, he sees his people. He hears them crying out. And he sends Moses to go rescue them. And you guys probably know the story, or at least have seen the movie. So he goes in and through spectacular plagues, 10 spectacular plagues, he overturns the socioeconomic systems that are oppressing his people. But it's not just socioeconomic systems, right? He actually overturns the very gods of Egypt. So each one of those plagues corresponds to some Egyptian god that they used to worship. And the one true God, Yahweh, comes in and defeats the gods of Egypt. And then he comes down to the very last god, Pharaoh himself, right? With the 10th plague, the angel of death, God sends the angel of death. This is the one plague that would not just touch the Egyptians, but would touch everyone. And the only way you survive the angel of death is if you sacrifice a perfect, spotless, unblemished lamb, catch the blood, paint your post and lintel of your doorway, and your whole family goes in under the blood of the lamb into your house, and then you eat the lamb, you feed on the lamb. And for all those who've trusted God, who've gone under the blood and fed on the lamb, those are the people of God preserved from the angel of death, and they live. But those who do not trust God, who do not follow that way, they all experience the angel of death. He comes and kills all the firstborn sons. And by the blood of the Lamb, they're redeemed. They're set free from slavery. They go out of Egypt, and then they pass through, of course, the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, the Apostle Paul refers to this as like their baptism. They're identifying with Moses himself and with God as they pass through. And now they become this new people, and God behind them crushes the forces of evil. And now they're free. You're free. You're saved from your slavery. You're saved from oppression. You're saved from Egypt. And they're like, yes, this is so great. If you read, so this is Genesis or Exodus chapter 12 is the Passover, and 13 and 14. You see like, oh, we're set free. And you see this great song. They break out tambourines because that's what you do when you have a wild party in the ancient Near East. And they sing about the salvation of God. And then they're like, we're free for this. Why did you bring us out here to kill us? They're free to go into the desert. God leads them through the desert, and I don't know, this begs the question that they asked Moses, and we should all ask ourselves, why in the world did you save us? We might make this more contemporary. So for them, they went through the Red Sea, which is their baptism, into this new salvation, this life with God. We practice baptism today, right? So here's the question. Why, when we baptize people, why do we bring them back up out of the water? Right? Why don't we just hold them down? If salvation is about being set free, if it's just about being saved from something, if it's just about going to heaven, getting out of hell, why do we bring them back up ever? And so, what's the point of salvation? And then God leads them through the desert, and finally they arrive at this mountain. And at this mountain, God says this, he says this in Exodus chapter 19. Then Moses went up to God, And the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. You've seen it, you've seen it, you've seen it, you've seen how I saved you. You know that I did save you. You know that I did set you free from slavery. You know that I defeated the forces of evil. You saw the plagues, you saw the miracles I did." But now watch this, verse 5. This is going to be no less miraculous than what he's already done. And in some ways, the world's going to be more changed by this next statement than any plague that he ever did. "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Like, do you hear this? God says, "I'm going to take you. You who think you're slaves still, you who think you're hopeless and powerless, you who are still craving for the cuisine of Egypt, you who are broken and ignorant and nothing but tribal day laborers, you who were worth nothing in the world's eyes, and I'm going to make you my treasured possession. I'm going to make you a kingdom of priests that you are going to represent to the whole world who I am and what I look like. You're going to present to the world, this is our God, this is what he looks like. You're going to be for me a holy nation. You're going to be, as a people, you're going to be set apart for me in a way that no other nation will be." Do you hear this? Do you hear this? God's not just saving you from something, from Egypt. He's saving you for something. He's saving you for glory. He's saving you to change the world. Which begs the question, how? So they go to this mountain. Mount Sinai is the famous spot somewhere in there. And the question is, how now is God going to take this people who've been spent 400 years being transformed by Egyptian culture, 400 years who know nothing about God, 400 years getting a taste for Egyptian life and Egyptian culture, people who, when they think of who God is, they fashion a golden calf. How is God going to take these ancient people and make them into his very special possession? How is he going to take these people? And I want you to think about this in practical terms. What other ancient Near Eastern people group do you know that's still around today? What are the ones still making headlines? I want you to think, God decided to take this specific people group, and through these people, he's going to make them literally the most influential people in the history of the world, this tiny little nation. Now, how do you do that? So Moses goes up on the mountainside and he receives the 10 commandments. And when he comes down, he's like, his face is glowing, beams of light are shooting out of his face. And he comes down the mountain with this sacred word of God, this Torah. And he's ready to explain once and for all to God's people, this is how God is going to change you and make you into his very special people, a kingdom of priests. This is how he's going to do it. Are you ready? Exodus 23. Don't make cheeseburgers. Exodus 20, take off one day a week. Exodus 20, don't long for your neighbor's stuff. Leviticus 19, don't wear cotton polyester blends. Leviticus 23, take 3 week-long vacations a year to Jerusalem. And on we could go. Hold immoral people accountable to the community. Don't abuse your employees or your animals. Make sure you don't have mildew in your house. Don't allow people to seek personal revenge. Don't eat bacon. God gives his people the Torah, the law. And I want you to hear how utterly mundane this is. What's God's plan to transform his people? What is his plan to take slaves and turn them into his children who reflect his glory to the nation, who changed the course of the history of the world? It's not a set of things to believe. It's not a confession. It's not a creed. It's a way of life. It's a culture. It's what you fix for dinner. It's what you wear. It's how you spend your free time. It's what you do with your money. It's how you work and vacation. It's the rhythms of life. It's how you seek justice and reconciliation. It's how you mourn. It's how you celebrate. It is a God-ordained culture that he's scripting everything, every piece of their lives to transform them. That this culture will not only set them apart from every other nation in the world, it's going to in some way reflect the glory of God. The same way that Moses reflected the glory of God when he came down the mountain, that they are supposed to reflect the glory of God in a way that no other people will. So let's try and wrap our minds around this. Let's put together, we have these different pieces of vocab that we don't use in our everyday language. We have law, Torah, glory, culture, kingdom of priests. These are not normal words. So let's put some meat on these bones here, and let's give a word picture that I've used. I try and break out at least once a year because I think this is such a helpful way of thinking through how we understand our relationship with God. So in Hebrew, lesson number 1, Hebrew, this word halak, say halak. Halak. It just means to walk, literally to walk. All right? Halak. It's one foot in front of the other, to walk. But in ancient Hebrew, of course, they did not walk on treadmills and they did not walk as a leisure activity, right? They may have, well, not treadmills, but you know what I mean. They walked everywhere, right? When you don't have cars, when you don't have other ways of getting around, walking is not just like a leisure time activity. It's what you do. It's how you get around in life. So walking for them becomes so much more than just the word to walk. Halak takes on this word of, this is your way of life. This is how you live. This is your culture. Now get this though. Halak. Halakha, say that. Halakha. Say like you're hawking up a luga. Halakha. Yeah, that's good. So if halak is to walk, halakha is the way, literally the path. Now here's the thing. For ancient Jews, that wasn't just the path. It's also the same word they used to describe all of God's law and the traditions surrounding God's law. The path probably looked less like this and more like this, actually. So here's the idea. What does walking have to do with laws and traditions? And here's the point. Laws and traditions are not just laws and traditions. There's something, not just something you believe in your heart. They are a way of life for them. They are the way of living life with God. And this way can only be found through walking the path. So this is going to break down when we use halak and halakha to describe what it means to follow and obey God's laws. This is going to break down some things that we don't have in our language and we need to recover somehow. When we talk about the Bible being true, in English, this forms the conversation in weird ways. So we talk about the Bible's true, and you know what we immediately use? Words like inerrant. And I'm great with that. Okay, let's call it inerrant. Sure. But that immediately makes us think of discrete facts as though the Bible's a fact book, as though it's Wikipedia. It's not. As though it's a rule book, like, how do I do this if I'm going to fix this? It's not. The Bible is fundamentally more than this. It's a path to walk. It calls us into a relationship with the living God. I want you to hear this, that according to just the language of following the law, it's not enough to know the law. You have to walk it. And the same way, it's not enough to master this book. You can't go to a classroom and truly say you know the Scriptures. The only way you can truly know the Scriptures is to walk it. You can get a doctorate in theology. But if you've never walked with God, if you've never prayed, if you've never responded, if you've never listened, if you've never wrestled with Him, then you don't know God. So, this language... There's a famous Jewish scholar named Jacob Neusner who gives us kind of this picture of what maybe a Jew from Jesus' time. He's an authority on rabbinic Judaism. So this would be ancient Jewish thought from Jesus' time. How would they think through this? And I think this picture is helpful. So if you think through, God gives His law, His Torah, And we call that the halakha, right? To Moses. Moses goes up on the mountain, he receives it, and he's like literally glowing with the glory of God because he's experienced this thing. And he comes down the mountain, and then he goes to his disciple or student, Joshua, and he says, hey, here's the law of God. But he doesn't just teach him the lessons. He says, this is how you walk it. This is how you live it in your life. This is what it looks like to embody it, to live out God's law. And then Joshua goes to the 12 elders, the elders over the people of Israel, and says, hey, this is it. This is how you walk it. And then they start to experience the glory of God. And the more that people walk in that, the more they radiate, like Moses, the very glory of God to our world. And the idea is that it goes from Moses to Joshua, to the elders, to the people of Israel, and down from generation to generation, from teacher to student, or in Hebrew we would say from rabbi to disciple. From rabbi to disciple. Until we get down to years later. I want you to hear, this is not just a set of beliefs. It's about, you have to halak the halakha. You have to walk the path. You have to walk the path. You have to live these things to know them. So there's an ancient Jewish expression of blessing. It goes like this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. That your rabbi was the one who teaches you. So this is metaphorical, right? The rabbi is the one who walks the path just in front of you. And you want to learn how to live as he lives, eat as he ate, talk as he talked, spend your money the way he spent his money, do relationships the way he did his relationships, that you follow so closely behind your rabbi that it actually kicks up dust on you and it sticks to your sweaty brow so that you are covered, literally covered in the dust of your rabbi because you've walked so closely behind him along the path. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, thanks, Paul. Man, if I want to become an Orthodox Jew, this would be so helpful. But we're Christians. We've been set free from the law, right? It's for freedom that we've been set free. We don't have to worry about food and holidays and clothing. We don't have to worry about those things. It's about an interchange. It's about loving God, believing in Jesus. We're not trying to create a Christian culture. So what are you talking about, Paul? Like, what does all this ancient Jewish halakha business have to do with Jesus? Which brings us to the Gospels. Have you ever noticed what Jesus says to his first disciples? So some of his first statements. So Matthew 4:19, Mark 1:17, Luke 5:27, John 1:43. Like the first invitation he gives to his disciples. Do you know what it is? Follow me. I'm a rabbi. I'm looking for disciples. I'm going to teach you how to walk the path. The Apostle Paul, trained as an expert in Jewish law prior to becoming a Christian, when he describes what it means to be a Christian, what does he do? He says, Romans 4:12, true believers are not just those who are biological children of Abraham. That is not it. It's not just an ethnic thing. True believers are those who walk in the footsteps of the faith, who walk the halakha, who halak the halakha, who walk the path, who actually live it out. In his letters to the early churches, he describes the Christian life this way. Romans 6:4, we walk in newness of life. Romans 8:4, we do not walk according to the flesh. Romans 13:13, let us walk properly. 2 Corinthians 5:17, walk by faith, not by sight. Galatians 5:16, walk by the Spirit. Ephesians 4 and Colossians 1:10, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Ephesians 5:2, walk in love. More than 35 times, the Apostle Paul will describe the Christian life as halak, to walk, to walk, to walk. The Apostle Peter, he's trying to encourage some Christians who are suffering. I want you to listen to his advice here. He says, to this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example. He's your example that you should follow in his steps, that you should walk the way he walks. You should walk the way he walks. The earliest Christians, before they were ever called Christians, in Acts chapter 9, verse 2, they were a people who belonged to what? They were called people who belong to the way, the halakha. So for the earliest Christians, the Christian life, let me just be crystal clear here. The Christian life was not just about accepting a creed or a confession, although it was that. It's not just about loving God in your heart, although it was about that. It's not just about internal transformation. You had to have all that, but if you had all that and you didn't actually walk the way, you weren't part of the way. It's fundamentally experiential and relational. It's a way of life. That it's an internal transformation that then radiates outward and forces you to change how you walk. It changes everything. Christianity is fundamentally, in the New Testament, a way of living life with God. And this can't be boiled down to a list of rules or rituals. We're not like, oh, you got to wear this t-shirt and eat at Chick-fil-A and listen to this music. It can't be boiled down to that because it's not just a list of rules. It's dynamic. It's a relationship because it's not a fact book that we're following. It's a person. So this brings us to John chapter 14. Jesus is ready to die, and he's a rabbi, right? He's a rabbi teaching his disciples, and he says, hey, I'm going on a journey to my Father's house to prepare a room for you. And Philip's like, is Joseph around? What? He's like, we don't know who your father, what are you talking about? We don't know where you're going. How could we know how to get there? How are we supposed to follow you? And what does Jesus say to Philip? He says, I am the way, the halakha. I'm the way and I'm the truth and I'm the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Do you hear this? Do you hear this? Jesus is not saying that for Christians there is no law, no tradition, no way of doing life, no culture. He's saying that he is the way. He is the halakha. He's the way to do life. He's inviting us, follow me, do life the way I do it. Walk as I walk, be covered in my dust. He's not simply calling us to believe some truths about him. He's not simply asking us to accept him into our heart, although we should. He's asking us to follow him on the way to God. That his way of life should form our life. He should form how we eat and how we shop and how we watch TV and how we commute and how we work and how we vacation and how we dress, everything. That we should walk as Jesus walked, that we should forgive as he forgave, we should serve as he served, we should sacrifice as he sacrificed, we should speak as he spoke, we should love as he loved, because he is the way. And here's the thing. This doesn't seem to be optional. Living like Jesus doesn't seem to be like, oh, you can believe in Jesus but then not live like that. It's not like you can believe in Jesus and then not follow his way of life. It makes no sense that he is the way to God. So I want you to hear this. And when we think through culture and we think through faith, when we think through how does how I live affect my faith and how does my faith affect how I live, for Christians, this begs this terrible question that it should make a huge difference in everything. And the question is, does it? Does my way of life look like Jesus? Does my house and my job and the way I vacation and the way I watch TV and the way I dress, does that radiate the glory of God? Like if you looked at the way I work and vacation and dress and watch TV and use my phone and eat and drink and exercise and shop, does my life look like Jesus? Does it reflect the change that I've experienced on the inside? Am I walking the path? Because if our lives don't look like that, it begs some serious, serious questions. Like, do we really love him? Do we really believe in him? I don't want to leave you with this hopeless question, though. Here's the good news. There's good news here. God specializes in taking a people who are not a people who think of themselves as enslaved, people who are hopeless and powerless and ignorant and hated. He specializes in taking them and making them into his treasured possession, a kingdom of priests. And that is what he's calling all of us to be. So as we close today, I want to leave you with this question to prepare us for the weeks to come. Where's your journey going to start? Like if you start evaluating your life and looking, does this reflect Jesus? Does my schedule, does my time, do my possessions, do my investments, do they reflect Jesus? Where does it go? And here's to get really practical, I would encourage you to do this. Start here. So it's not coincidental that God, when he wants to save his people and he wants to transform them, the first thing he does is he doesn't take them immediately to the mountain and say, here you go, here's how to live. No, first he takes them into the desert, to a place of complete deprivation, a place where they're completely ripped out of Egyptian culture, right? Where the only way they can possibly survive is an utter dependence on God. And they're completely in a vacuum, removed from all culture. They realize their own evil desires. They realize their need for God. They realize how Egypt has formed them, and only then are they ready to receive God's way of life. And I'm not suggesting that you all literally go to the desert, although if you get a chance, you probably should. What I am suggesting is that the only way that we can possibly see how culture is affecting us right now is if we remove ourselves voluntarily from it. This is an ancient Christian practice called fasting. So what I'm going to suggest is that in this next week, and this is as practical as I ever get, I want you to evaluate your life, and I want you to say, man, how are things affecting me? I don't know what this is for you, but are there areas of your life that you have not yet inspected of like, man, how does this reflect God? How does this help me become more like Jesus or less like Jesus? How does this affect my love for God and my belief in God? So maybe reflect on just the habits that you've created in life. Like maybe it's the show you watch. Maybe it's the music you play on repeat. Maybe it's the Starbucks stop you make every day. Maybe it's the apps you have to open on your phone every couple minutes. Maybe it's the websites you visit. Maybe it's the drink you have at the end of the night. I don't know what it is for you. What are your habits that you've created in life? And what if you just shut them off for an entire week? What would that say about your desires and about you? So just to get super practical here, for me, the choice was easy. Preparing for this message, I knew that I actually had to apply it. Choice stinks. And my wife was ever so helpful. She's been reading Andy Crouch's book on Tech-Wise Family. And so with her encouragement, I had to kind of come to the conclusion that I'm on my phone a bit too much. So like if I'm standing in line for just a second, I whip it out. Before I go to bed, it's the last thing I see at night. It's the first thing I see in the morning. It tells me it loves me all the time. I love my phone. So 3 weeks ago now, I did something that has been horrifically painful and so good. First, I went through and I removed all the fun apps, like everyone. But then I realized that's not enough. I had to actually take my phone and kick it out of my bedroom. It wasn't invited in anymore. Couldn't use it as an alarm clock because it was just too much. So I kicked it out of my bedroom. But then it still wasn't enough. And this last one, it was like sawing off my own appendage. I actually had to remove my email from it. Oh, what's the point of a phone if you don't have email on it? And that process over the last 3 weeks has really forced me to see how dependent I am on that. It's forced me to realize some things about, man, I have some habits that aren't good. I've been developing thoughts that just aren't helpful. I'm too obsessed with the wrong types of things. I'm not taking time to develop my prayer life or my response to God because I'm too busy on a Facebook or an email app or something like that. I don't know what it is for you, but if you were to give up one thing for the week, what would it be? Let's pray. Father, I pray as we enter into this series on culture, God, that you would speak to our hearts and you would just be a wake-up call to us. God, I pray that as we even think through voluntarily giving up something this week, Lord, I pray that you'd lay on our hearts right now what that thing needs to be and what it would look like to give that area of our life up to you. God, I pray that you would show us how to walk the path, what it looks like to be a people who really reflect your glory, who don't just know the right answers and don't just believe it in our hearts, but live in relationship with you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.